Jesus really mean when he said, "On this rock I will build my church"? Well, to answer that, we need to look at the geography, the history, and the very stage Jesus chose for his words. Now, in our last video, that's Series 5 SBS1, we investigated and determined the pitfalls inherent in any translation process. After all, Jesus spoke and taught in Hebrew or Aramaic, but we have had his words recounted to us in Greek and then further translated to us, in our own native language, in our case, English. So we need also to look at the historical and geographical settings to understand why Jesus took his close disciples to this place to explain to them the truths he was about to reveal privately. So, Caesarea Philippi, where was this? Well, it was at the foot of Mount Hermon. And what do we know about this place? Well, it was a place of pagan worship, shrines to Pan and Zeus and even Augustus Caesar. And there was a cave, and at the source of the Jordan River, and it was believed to be the gateway to the underworld, the gates of Hades. So why did Jesus bring them to this spot? After all, it was some 25 kilometers from Caesarea. And further, it was outside the boundaries of Israel, echoing Deuteronomy's boundaries of the nations. We find that in Deuteronomy 32 and verse 8. So, was this a deliberate confrontation in the very heart of idolatry, where Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter's words, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." A direct challenge, a living God versus dead idols carved into rock. And Jesus' reply, "On this rock," not Peter, but the rock mass they were standing on. This rock mass representing the very heart of pagan worship. On this rock, the gates of Hades will not prevail. And it was spoken right beside the so-called gates themselves. Now, let us refresh our minds again on the exact words of Jesus. Matthew 16 and verse 18. "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Well, I don't know about you, but I have always been of the understanding that nothing could overpower the kingdom's defenses. However, Jesus is here saying that the offensive will come from the kingdom. And it is the gates of Hades that will not be able to withstand it. See, this is the very reverse of what I had previously understood. The offensive will come from the kingdom. And it is the gates of Hades that will not be able to withstand it. Have I repeated myself? Yes, I have. And for good reason. You see, there is nothing defensive about the kingdom of God. Just recall for a moment, how was the kingdom of Israel established? See, when Joshua's forces crossed the Jordan River and set about conquering Canaan, who were the attackers and who were the defenders? What was protecting the first city, Jericho, from falling? It was the walls. And what happened to them? The walls could not withstand the invading forces. The walls came tumbling down, as the song goes. So with that in mind, how would this mold our thoughts and our actions? Remember, Jesus was privately training his close disciples. So let's see how this works in practice. Let's turn to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 and verse 39. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. How do you think the public crowds listening to this would have taken it? Remember, they were expecting an all-conquering Messiah to remove the Roman yoke. But what was Jesus advocating? Apparently, pacifism. Does that make any sense? Do you think the listening crowds would have been at least somewhat puzzled? However, in the light of what we have just learned, that the kingdom cannot be conquered, what was he actually teaching his close disciples who were going to take his teachings forward? Well, he was training them to develop a magnanimous and an empathetic attitude towards their opposers. And why? Because the kingdom could not be beaten. So they needed to develop a mindset that would draw opposers into the kingdom arrangement. And of course, we today would want to do all we can to get people to come into that very arrangement. You think it would be a practical way to develop the mind of Christ? Easy, yeah? I don't think so. It needs work, doesn't it? But how can we be sure that this is the right way? See, well, his disciples got their answer just 6 days later. Jesus took them, that's Peter, James, and John, to a high mountain, very likely Mount Hermon, overlooking Caesarea Philippi, and of course the gates of Hades. Let the Gospel of Mark inform us about what the disciples learned. Mark chapter 9 and verses 2 through to 7. Now, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And there he was transfigured before them. His clothes became radiantly white, brighter than any launderer on earth could bleach them. And Elijah and Moses appeared before them, talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For they were all so terrified that Peter did not know what else to say. Then a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and a voice came from the cloud. This is my son, my beloved son. Listen to him. Jesus, with Moses and Elijah, they were surrounded by God's glory, the law and the prophets bearing witness. And then what? A voice from heaven. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. You know, the principle of 2 witnesses come to my mind, and they're coming into full play here, aren't they? This time, though, these witnesses are Jesus and Jehovah God themselves. Now, what was the implications of this transfiguration for the early disciples? Well, we see it played out in the way the early congregation developed. James, not Peter, led the Jerusalem community. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 12, echoes this. And the true foundation, the teaching of Jesus, not any single man. See, the focus is not on a human leader, but on Jesus Christ revealed in glory. So by choosing Caesarea Philippi, Jesus wasn't just teaching with words. He was teaching with geography, with history, and showing a contrast against the idols, against death, against false temples. See, the Son of God reveals the true rock, and on this foundation his people would stand forever. So, what have we deduced so far? Certainly Jesus engaged in two ministries. Yeah? One public. The best example we have being the Sermon on the Mount. In the gospel accounts, however contradictory they may sometimes appear to be, we get to understand the guiding principles for all disciples to become grounded in. However, it was his private ministry that was geared specifically for his disciples. It was to train them to take forward the message of God's purpose, the kingdom of God. Was there going to be resistance to Jehovah God's purpose? Of course there was. There always has been resistance to God's purpose, from Genesis right through to our day today. So it should not come as any surprise to see the resistance even following Jesus' death. But resistance from where? See, well, what we have noticed about, say, the four gospel accounts, as an example, why have three of them come to be known as the synoptic gospels, while John is regarded as separate? Now, when we read the Gospel of John, here is a very interesting observation. In that gospel, James and John are not mentioned. Peter on 4 occasions, Thomas on 5 occasions. John chapter 20, verses 27, 20, 26, 27, and 28, portrayed in a very negative way as a doubter, doubting Thomas. 24 and 25, again, negative and doubting. Chapter 21 and verse 2, just named with the others. That's all, just a list, part of the list. Chapter 11, verse 16, well, somewhat reckless and naive. And chapter 14 and verse 5, well, a bit slow to understand. Again, a bit negative. This whole portrayal of Thomas being very negative. And yet, this was the one Jesus chose. What about others? What about Peter? Chapter 21 and verse 15 and 17. Feed my sheep, says Jesus to Peter. Chapter 6 and verse 68. Whom shall we go with? Peter to Jesus. Verses 41 and 42 and 40 in chapter 1, well, it's just the selection process, so he's part of a list. But 18 and verses 10 and 11, the impetuous strike of against Malchus, taking his ear off. But overall, much more positive about Peter, yes. But James? Nothing. Why would James not even be mentioned? The appointed leader following Jesus' death. So it's good to ask the question, who was this who penned this Gospel of John? This is really worth investigating, as we shall see in the next episode. So if you have appreciated this information so far, please like, subscribe, and share, and we look forward to the next time. So thank you very much.